Hello and welcome to the 2nd of December reading from the Journey in through Advent with Handel's Messiah, the booklet entitled Alleluia. We've looked at the overture and we've looked at Comfort Ye My People, the tenor solo, from Isaiah 40 verses 1 to 3. And now we look at the tenor aria, which is longer than the tenor solo. This is using Isaiah 40 verse 4. Every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill made low, the crooked straight, and the rough places plain. Several years ago, Barack Obama, the former United States President, visited Cardiff. He stayed at Celtic Manor, the luxury hotel resort just outside Newport, which was the host venue for a NATO summit of world leaders. Years went into the planning. No expense was spared. The M4 motorway between Newport and Cardiff was temporarily reconfigured. The roads into Cardiff city centre had never looked better. There was not a pothole or roadwork in sight. Truly, the rough places were made plain. It's what happens when someone important is on the way. In today's meditation, Isaiah pictures creation getting ready for the arrival of the Lord. No expense is spared. Tectonic plates realign. Flawless tarmac rolls out as far as the eye can see, if tarmac was invented in them days. Nothing can delay or deter a God, uppercase G, who is set on saving. Maybe God feels far away right now. All you see are the hills and valleys in front of you, some of them as high as Mount Everest or as deep as the Grand Canyon. Hills of difficulty, valleys of despair. If there is a road between you and divine help, it feels crooked and rough and altogether treacherous and impassable. Can God really get past all the twisting and turning, the bumps and boulders to reach us in our time of need? He most certainly can. The Lord is near to all who call on him, in truth, writes the psalmist in Psalm 145, verse 18 in the NIV version of the Bible. Any distance between us and God is our problem, not his. If God wants to get through to us, no puny mountain or gaping ravine will slow him down. That means no regrets we may have about yesterday will hold him back. No burdens of today will throw him off. No anxiety about tomorrow will overwhelm him. If creation itself can be moulded like putty to clear the way for God to get through, then you can be certain divine aid is close at hand. Handel captures such divine bulldozing brilliantly, with the tenor's aria recreating the scripture musically. Why not listen again and observe that the melody goes up for the word exalted, down for the words made low, meanders up and down for the word crooked, and stays constant for the word plain. Then marvel at what a privilege it is to have access to God on the open road. That's a short meditation for today. They usually are only a few verses long. And tomorrow, God willing, we'll look at the next verse, Isaiah 40 verse 5. It's a chorus. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. And now we will continue our reading of Paul Gallico's The Story of Silent Night. Today I shall read the last bit of page 26 up to page 39. Now, so it's at the end of page 26 we continue. As a travelling man, the organ mender brought news too, social and political, from gossip of the neighbouring towns to the uneasy peace that had settled upon Europe now that Napoleon was no longer there to menace it. Though there was no telling how long those barbarian Bavarians to the north would remain quiet. Still, times were better. Even those colonial wars in the Americas seemed to have come to an end. He went on to say he had heard that in Vienna, Beethoven had completed his Grand Mass in D, and the composer was supposed to be working now on a 9th Symphony. Of all things embodying a chorale. Maracha had met him once, an unpleasant fellow but unquestionably a good musician. Gruber listened silently. Arnsdorf and Obendorf had little or nothing to contribute to the march of events. The job completed at last, the two men went around from behind the organ loft into the church, where Maracha seated himself at the console. Air was pumped up into the renewed bellows, and to the delight of Gruber's ears, a Bach, toccata and fugue filled the building. And then suddenly, in the midst of a resounding phrase, Maracha stopped, turned to Gruber and asked, "When was it you said your damage occurred?" The morning of Christmas Eve." "I thought that's what I heard," said the Tyrolean. "Whatever did you do for music then?" This was the first time that anyone had inquired about the now forgotten Christmas Eve musical crisis. Gruber smiled in collection. "Well, it was a little unusual. Do you remember Moore, the chap who was here as assistant priest then?" "No, I don't think I ever met him. He was something of a versifier and a musician too. We both used to strum the guitar. Well, he wrote a little poem and I set it to music. We sang it with a children's chorus. It was scored for two male voices, tenor and baritone, that is to say, Moore and myself, with a guitar accompaniment. You should have seen the faces of the congregation when we entered the nave, but it seemed to go down well." And now he smiled again. At least the whole bizarre business was quickly forgotten. Maracha looked astonished. "What a combination! I never heard of such a thing. I should like to see that." "Goodness," Gruber laughed. "I wouldn't know where to begin to look for it, or where Joseph put it, if it hasn't been swept out already. Sagen Sie mal, Frau Schneider." And here Gruber addressed a stout Putzfrau, the cleaning woman, who was passing through with her bucket and mop. "Did Father Moore leave any papers behind anywhere other than those in the music cupboard? I know it isn't there, because I only recatalogued our library recently." Frau Schneider reflected. The church was full of corners, crannies, and chests. She suggested, "There would only be that old closet behind the vestry where he used to keep his clothes and his guitar." "If you like," Gruber offered, "I'll have a look." A moment later they heard him shout, Ha! As amidst old bits of paper, half-written scores and hymn books without covers, crumpled and dusty, apologies, he retrieved the manuscript of the poem and music. Returning, he handed it to the organ mender, who placed it on the music rack before him, pulled out the stop of the Vox Humana, and tentatively fingered the melody, his lips moving as he read the words. "You see," said Gruber, "it's nothing." "Well," Maralka replied, and showed his teeth through his bushy beard in a curious kind of smile. "Wait." He eyed the score once more, then began opening stops until he had activated the whole noble range of the pipes. He threw back his massive head, and with an accompaniment as though rendered by an orchestra of flutes, viols, and trumpets, filled the church with the hymn until the beams of the roof shivered. He grinned at Gruber. "It has something, hasn't it, old fellow?" Gruber laughed. "You have something, my dear master. You could make a 5-finger exercise sound like a Handel Alleluia." Maralka said, "You might let me have a copy?" Gruber only laughed again and said, "Take it with you if you like. No one here will have any further use for it, since you have mended our organs so perfectly." Maralka nodded, stuffed the score inside his coat pocket, shouldered his bag of tools and pouches, and climbed onto the driver's seat of his wagon. "If the elders should decide upon a new organ," he shouted as he drove off, "don't forget us." Waved, and Gruber watched him out of sight, and along with the only extant score of Silent Night, out of mind. When some 3 months later Maralka returned to Fugen, the incident had dimmed, overshadowed by other events of his trip. An order for a great new organ to be built along the most modern lines, plus more news of the world outside of their valley, the political troubles brewing in the north in Saxony and Brandenburg. He came upon the crumpled score once more among his papers when he unpacked. He meant to show it to the choir master. He meant to play it for his wife and children. He meant even some time to make an organ transcription along the lines of his improvisation. But as so often happens, life in the immediate took over. The song was not heard from again for 3 years. In the year 1822, Kaiser Franz Joseph I of Austria and Tsar Alexander I of Russia, during one of those political intimacies which in the Europe of the 19th century were to spell life or death for so many marching infantrymen, came to Fugen as guests at the castle of Count Ludwig von Donhoff. And one evening the Count had some of the locals up to entertain his royal visitors. Amongst these were the family Rainer, the precursors of today's famous Austrian trap family singers, from The Sound of Music, made popular. In their repertoire was Silent Night. Their Majesties were delighted, so much so that the Tsar invited the singers to St. Petersburg. And here, strangely, the flame dies out again for 10 more years. It is said that the Rainers continued to spread the song and even took it with great success to America. Yet they do not appear again in its strange career. Perhaps their function was solely to receive it at some time or other from the hands of Karl Maralka, maybe at one of those moments of violent spring cleaning, where Frau Maralka, tackling the mess of manuscripts in a cupboard, threatened to throw the lot out unless her husband did something about them. Thus the song would have come to his attention again, and he could have passed it to this group. Yet the ears and the hearts of people might still have been unprepared. It is quite possible that had the song been published then, it might never have accomplished that for which it was destined. Silent Night was next heard through another family, the Geschwisterstrasse, a quartet consisting of 2 brothers and 2 sisters from Laimach in the Zillertal. Laimach and Fugen are neighbours, and again we are back in the Tyrol. In addition to their yodeling and peasant Schuurplattler dance, which included a great deal of stamping and rump slapping, the Tyroleans were famous throughout Teutonic Europe as the fountainhead of Austrian folk song. They were both a fashion and a fad, and when they appeared in their native costume and sang their sentimental mountain songs, they were received enthusiastically. Everyone in the Tyrol seemed to sing, and here again one faces the mystery of design. Would the song have caught on ever by itself if rediscovered as the creation of two unknown men? Or was it the fact that it made its bow to Europe as a Tyrolean folk song, authors unknown, that gave it its initial impetus, the appeal of something primeval? It would remain authors unknown where Silent Night was concerned for some 40 years or more following its creation. Yet the names of the Strasser Quartet have come down to us. The two girls were Amelie and Carolina, I think. The boys, Andreas and Peppy. They were not professional singers like the Rainers, but glove makers. Some of the finest chamois and kid-skin gloves were exported from the Tyrol to the great annual Leipzig Summer Fair. When the Strassers brought their winter's work there, the Geschwister would earn a little extra money by giving modest concerts of Tyrolean folk songs, and by then Silent Night was in their repertoire too. It had become a native creation, belonging neither to Maracha, if he remembered, nor the Rainers, but to the country. Authors would only have been an embarrassment to authenticity. They sang it for the first time in Leipzig at a small affair in 1831 as one of a group of 4 indigenous carols. A new character in the design made a brief appearance, Franz Ascher, organist of the Royal Saxon Court Orchestra. He was in the audience, found the song enchanting, and invited the quartet to return the following year in December and sing it at the Christmas Mass, which would be held in the Royal Chapel at Pleissenburg nearby. The family was delighted to accept such an honour. The thrifty glove manufacturers worked hard on a consignment for Christmas sale, and the 4 singers arranged and advertised a concert of their own the same month in the ballroom of the Hotel Cologne. The notice appeared in the Leipziger Tagesblatt, where it triggered an anonymous letter, another strand in the fine skein that was being woven. Had one single thread been severed? Greatly honoured sirs, having seen the announcement in your valued newspaper pertaining to the concert of the Geschwisterstrasse from the Tyrol, might it be in order respectfully to request them to include the little Weihnachtslied Stille Nacht in their programme? I had the pleasure of listening to them sing it last year and would enjoy hearing it again. Yours faithfully, an admirer. The 4 were delighted to comply. It was added publicity and guaranteed them at least 1 paid admission. But it was not a question of 1, but of how many could be packed into the hall. It was an ideal seasonal entertainment and an opportunity to hear the quartet known to have been invited to sing in the King's Chapel. And now the time, the place, and the audience were right, with one more important character waiting in the wings for his cue to enter the story and play his part. Once more the 4 Strassers, the girls fresh-faced, their dark hair looped in braids about their heads, clad in bright-coloured dundles, whatever they are, with contrasting aprons. The boys in green trousers, foresters' jackets, and frilled shirts, blended their voices in their rendition of the Tyrolean Christmas song. Only this time it was different. For it was Christmas time that night, without and within, and this was, amongst other things, not a church, but a concert hall. The Christmas spirit was abroad. In the homes there was the smell of roasting goose, sugared fruits, Lebkuchen and Weihnachtsstollen, the traditional holiday cakes, pine boughs and holly berries. It was the time of mysterious comings and goings behind closed doors, packages and the whisperings of excited children. For the Germans it was the most endearing and sentimental season of the year. As for that important player who had been awaiting his summons, he was already there in the fourth row, sitting spellbound. His name was Anton Frieser, and he was a Dresden music publisher in Leipzig, briefly on business. To while away the last evening before returning to his home and the holiday celebration with his family, he had on impulse, as he passed the hotel, purchased a ticket and taken his seat. Perhaps it was the very urban smartness and sophistication of the members of the audience, in the face of the unexpected, that enabled the simple song to pierce directly to their hearts, evoke long-forgotten memories of childhood, of innocent days spent in the little villages and farms of their youth. It had a nostalgia that seemed to bring back all the love and tenderness of Christmases past, to combine with that of their own children of the present. When the last note had died away, the audience sat silent, still enchained by the mixture of emotions evoked. Then the pent-up feeling overflowed into a storm of applause, and the quartet was compelled to repeat the number. And this time Herr Frieser was ready. For at the first hearing he had been too overwhelmed by the thoughts and recollections the song had aroused in him to do more than listen, and know that his eyes were moist. Extracting a pencil from his pocket, he turned over his programme, which had merely listed Tyrolean Christmas Folk Song, authors unknown, and on the back drew the 5 lines in treble clef. As he listened for the second time, he jotted down the words, and in a kind of a musical shorthand of his own, captured the notes of the melody as well. That night at his hotel he transcribed the entire song perfectly, or that is to say, almost perfectly, except for 1 or 2 slight lapses of memory that were to irritate the composer in the years to come and eventually supplant the original. The Christmas song returned with him to Dresden, and in 1840 appeared for the first time in print, published by Frieser under the title 4 Genuine Tyrolean Songs sung by the brothers and sisters Strasser from the Zillertal. It was scored for 4 voices, and there was a second version for piano and single voice. This was fine publicity for the Strassers, as well as giving the song authenticity and cachet. What the family Rainer had to say about this is not recorded. Shortly after it was noted in a Catholic songbook, and then was glibly pirated from collection to collection. In 1844 it had travelled to Berlin, where it was published by Fink in Musical Home Treasures of the Germans, thence lifted to Dr. Gebhardt's Musical Youth's Friend, and in 1848 to the same publisher's Musical School Friend, but always credited as a Tyrolean or Austrian folk song of unknown origin. In all likelihood the Strassers never knew who had written it, and Herr Maraucher had either forgotten, or at the time he handed it over to the Rainers, did not deem it important. And since no name appeared on the original manuscript, there would have been no source to check. And now the song began to travel from Leipzig, Dresden and Berlin, like a stone thrown into a placid pool. The circles made by the modest hymn spread ever wider. It went south from Frankfurt, Mannheim and Stuttgart, north to Hanover and Hamburg, and crossed the borders of the Low Countries to Utrecht and Amsterdam. Prague and Vienna knew it, and it was heard as close to its original home as Salzburg. On Christmas Eve, when the candles of the tree were lit, it was sung by families in humble homes and in the proud courts of dukes, princes and electors. The village choir sang it to organ accompaniment, and it began to be performed as well at the Mass celebrating Christ's birth in the big cathedrals of Europe. And now that it was becoming so familiar, interest in its origins had been roused, and it was being ascribed variously to Caspar Aiblinger, the Bavarian court conductor and church composer, Ludwig van Beethoven, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Franz Joseph Haydn and his younger brother Michael Haydn, and a number of other well-known contemporary musicians. During this time, how fared the two men who actually had written it? Wagram today is a ski resort in the Niedere Tauern, in the shadow of the Arlberg. Gay, light-hearted, gay means happy in this context, light-hearted, colourful, with its hotels, chalets, and winter slopes alive with tourists and holidaymakers. This was written in about 1965. So, yes, I think it was published 1967. So we are talking about 58 years ago. In the early part of the 19th century, it was a collection of a few peasant huts and cowsheds and a small, poor chapel that could not even boast one of the more affluent onion-topped towers. It was also the end of the line for Joseph Mohr, the restless soldier's illegitimate child, and priest with the soul of a poet. After having wandered for some 10 years from parish to parish, he came there at last as vicar in the year 1828, and remained for 20 years. He departed as destitute as he had been born, for it was noted that he left nothing behind but a worn and much-darned soutane and his prayer book. There was not even money enough to bury him. He was interred at the expense of his community. All that is remembered of him is that he was loved, that the early fires of his youth subsided. He tended his flock, comforted the sick, presided at baptisms, marriages and deaths, instructed the young, and served his parish of stolid country folk to the best of his ability. His only pleasure was an occasional night in the Bierstube with the cowmen, but as the years dragged on he sang less. Always weak in the chest, in the winter of 1848, he was called to administer the last rites to a dying woman on a distant farm. Returning home, he caught cold, pneumonia followed, and he died. Not so much as a badly executed oil or even a pencil sketch of him existed when fame finally found him. And when at last in 1912 they went to exhume his poor remains to place his skull in the hands of a sculptor to enable the artist to reproduce something of what he might have looked like, for a bust destined to appear in a memorial chapel, not even his grave could be located. The cemetery had fallen into neglect. Tombstones had been overturned or made illegible by harsh winter storms, and there was nothing to denote remembrance of Mohr. Careful research and inquiry was necessary from still living old people who finally identified the spot. Franz Gruber was more fortunate. For 25 years he was a square peg in a round hole, a musician compelled to serve as school teacher while exercising his real profession only when doubling as an organist. In 1833, however, he succeeded to the post of director of the choir and organist of the principal church in Hallein, a thriving market town on the river Salzach, not far south of Salzburg. There he lived the not uncomfortable life of the bourgeois professional man whose compositions were achieving performances. He sired 12 children, of whom 2 surviving sons and daughters did him honour by following in his footsteps with musical talent. His at least was not wholly a voice crying out in the desert. He was heard. He wrote music, masses, chorales, and scored them for instruments. They were occasionally sung and played. He had increased both the size of his puddle and his own stature therein. He was a man worth the efforts of a painter, and both a portrait of him in middle life and photographs taken in old age survive. He died in Hallein in 1865 at the age of 78. Were these two men ever aware during this time of the resurgence of the creation of that long ago Christmas Eve? There is evidence that its appearance in one or another of the songbooks came to the attention of both Moore and Gruber, yet neither of them ever of their own volition laid claim to authorship. And I shall end there today because it's the end of the section, and there's a new section which tells two stories of the eventual disclosure of the real authors of Silent Night. So I shall finish the book, God willing, tonight and upload it tomorrow morning. So, on that score, as they say, until later, may God bless you all, God willing. God willing, we will have the reading tomorrow, tonight, and it will be uploaded for Wednesday morning. And may God bless you all. Amen.